Welcome to podcast number 64 for Thanks for Your Service. Our focus is on historical topics relating to the Australian military. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Just search for Thanks for Your Service. Our website is www.thanksforyourservice.net and you can email us at info@thanksforyourservice.net. Back in February this year, we chatted to Karen and Tom, the folks behind the podcast and webpage for 108 Years Later. It follows the day-by-day diary entries from a World War I digger. We catch up with Karen to see what has happened to the digger since February 1915 and to find out the identity of this previously unknown soldier. We last spoke to you in February this year. Can you just recap for our listeners about what 108 Years Later is actually about?
Yeah, thanks. It's basically the diary of an Anzac soldier from the year 1915. And we found this diary in July 2022. It was in a suitcase that we bought at an online auction. And my partner bought it because it was actually from a war journalist from World War II. And in the suitcase, there were loads of maps and drafts of articles and books that he was writing, which is another story in itself that we haven't even touched. And then in this suitcase, we found this journalist's brother's diary, which we realised was from World War I. So we decided we wanted to do something with it, and we ended up transcribing it. It took months to read the writing and wrote down our best interpretation of what he was writing. And then we started publishing it on the 1st of January this year, so 108 years later after he wrote it, and posted it each day that he wrote something to kind of tell his story in real time 108 years later.
When we caught up with you in February this year, your soldier in February 1915 was still in Egypt and had not yet embarked for Gallipoli. Now, we're talking to you in late July.
Yes.
What has happened since February 1915?
Yeah, so I think in February he was still that none of them knew where they were going or what the plan was, and then he actually witnessed the first landing at Gallipoli on the 25th of April, and he describes what he's witnessing and all the wounded soldiers coming back on the ships he was on that was overcrowded, and it's just and then the last line of that entry on the 25th of April was, he says, reports coming over, wholesale murder, which it was quite chilling to read, a first-hand experience. We know the story and the history, but it's another man, just one man's words describing it. And then on the morning of the 26th of April, he leaves for shore and lands at Gallipoli. He becomes an ammunition carrier along with his brother Fred, who gets mentioned quite a lot in the diary. And then that kind of end of April, May, he's just describing the daily routine of being in Gallipoli. And he describes on the 1st of May losing two of his close friends that have been mentioned, poor Alec Rackstraw and poor Norm. And then, so from about, I think it was the 15th of May to about the 16th of June, there's nothing written in the diary. So he obviously, whether he didn't have it or he wasn't able to write, can't even imagine what was going on that he wasn't writing. And then we decided at that point that we would release the whole diary because there was a bit of a gap. So on the 1st of July in 1915, he gets injured. So he states that he sprained his ankle, but in medical records we found recently it mentions shrapnel in his ankle, so I don't know what the actual injury was, but he's then in hospital, goes to a hospital ship and then in a hospital in Cairo, and then up until today's date, the 26th of July, he's in hospital at the Italia Auxiliary Hospital, and a lot of it is him describing his time there and recovering, eating, playing cards, watching movies. Says the flickers, which I'm assuming is the movies. Yeah, so that's where he is at this point, 108 years later.
And you said that you've released the whole diary, but people can still either get onto the website or listen to your podcast to get daily updates. But so he's been on Gallipoli, he's been injured / wounded.
Yeah.
He's still in Egypt at the moment, but in hospital.
Yep. Yeah, that's
And
very
and
scary.
and have you released any more information about what happens next? And then we'll talk a little bit about his identity.
Yeah, so we're continuing to post the daily entries as a blog post, so you can on each date read what he's written and then listen to the podcast of Tom reading it. So there's no, and then you can click on another page on the website to get the full diary. So if you want to know the end, it's there. So a few people are still following it day by day that I've spoken to, which is really interesting. So spoiler alert, do you want me to tell you what happens?
No, look, let's keep people in suspense, because if we tell them what happened, then they won't listen to the podcast or go to the website. Now, what plans, if any, are there to reveal his name and his details? Because we publicly still don't know, correct?
Well, I have. That's in the. If you actually read the full diary, it's at the end, so you can scroll down, read the whole diary, and then at the end, I've revealed his name and what details we've found out.
Okay, so let's a spoiler alert. Let's not name him. Let's drive people to the website of the podcast.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so and obviously from the start, you've known who the soldier is and his details.
Yes.
And where are you now with research into any known family links or history about him that you didn't know before? Was there anything new?
Yeah, it's been quite hard to find information, and I've said it's hard to find details of an ordinary man. He was one of many that were there. So we have not, I'm trying to work out how to say this without spoiling anything, but we have not been able to find any living relatives so far. I've tried, Ancestry.com and other family history websites and been able to kind of find him on family trees, but not being able to get in touch with anyone now. And I've tried a few different avenues of finding his name. So his name is on the website, and if anyone knows anything about it or has any other tips, I'd be very happy to hear, get some help or follow any leads. So.
Yeah. And a bit of a spoiler alert, we know that he survived the war because he's actually buried in Melbourne from my memory. Is that?
Yeah, well, I can tell you then he did come back to Melbourne, and he died in Frankston in October of 1965. So he would have been, how old was he then? He was 72. But he did not have any children. He was married, but that's kind of as far as we've been able to find. No actual, even as his brother, that was the World War II journalist, we haven't even been able to find any of his descendants to get in touch with.
Goodness. And so we're up to obviously July 1915. He's in Egypt. He's been to Gallipoli. Without saying too much, how much forward in time, in if that makes sense, does the diary actually cover of his war service, etc.?
Yeah, so the diary, we only have one diary, so the end of 1915. And then I have been able to find some war records and his medical records after 1915, which I have put at the end of that, the full diary story, just kind of a bit of a summary of what we found. And where he was, and when he returned to Melbourne. He did return to Melbourne in 1918, so he was there to the end of the war.
Goodness. Now you're doing a website. Well, you've done a website, obviously, and you're still doing the podcasts.
Yes.
And is Tom still the star of our podcast or your podcast?
Oh, absolutely, he's the star, and he's the voice of our soldier now. I can't. He just is the voice. And so we have recorded it all, so it's all up there if you wanted to listen to it month by month, so you can listen to each month at a time rather than going into each daily post. And Tom's actually overseas at the moment traveling, so he's been dropping business cards with the website all over Europe and promoting it. But yeah, so it's, and I said when Tom was reading it, he didn't know the end until he'd finished recording it, so it's good to all hear it all in one chunk now.
Mm. And can you remind us what the website is?
So it's 108yearslater.com. And we're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at 108yearslater.com.
And people can go also from a podcast perspective to most of their favourite podcast apps and look up 108 Years Later and also listen to the daily podcast. So on the website, there's the podcast, there's the transcript, there's photographs of each page of his diary.
So we put up the actual photo of the page and then our transcript. Most of the words we think we've got, but there's a few that are still a bit unclear. And then we've put up a few photos from the Australian War Memorial of just relevant pictures to the time. And I think I said before, every photo that I see that's unidentified soldier, I'm looking to see if it's him, because we have managed to find one photo of him, and it's on the website at the end of the full diary. Not a very clear photo, so it's very hard to then compare it to other photos. But it was lovely to see a photo of his face. Yeah.
So if we have any military history sleuths listening to this podcast, then they can go onto your website. They can get the identity of the soldier.
Yeah.
And if they can find anything else, photographs, relatives, any information, they can contact you through the website. Yeah.
Yeah. Send us an email through the website. That would be amazing. We'd really love to find some distant relative or someone that knew him, some connection. And also we haven't decided what we want to do with the actual diary either, like where that needs to be, whether it's donated or put on display or given to somebody, but we haven't decided that. And also then what we're going to further do with the actual transcript. Like I'd like to actually have a hard copy of it that makes it easier for people to read. So that's something we might look at doing at some point as well.
How much effort has it been in terms of putting this all together? Give us an idea of, in terms of the preparation. Obviously, you worked a lot on the transcripts, but you have put a lot of work into this.
It has. It's been a labour of love, and just became quite obsessed with the story and finding out about him and being able to tell his story, giving him a voice. So I couldn't even tell you how long, but I did have 4 or 5 months of long service leave last year. So apart from a few other projects, I spent a lot of time on this. But I couldn't tell you how many hours, but a lot. And it's been really really satisfying to kind of put it all together.
And have you had contact from people? You've said that Tom's been overseas, etc. What sort of feedback and contact have you had from people who've been listening to the podcast or going onto your website, etc.?
Yeah, we've had the posts are still getting several likes a day, which is good. Not I was happy that even one person listened to it, so I'm happy to see that there has been more than that. And just people when it was people wanting to actually find out what happened and get the information. So it's been really interesting. And people have just been fascinated by that we found this, piece of history, and it's a personal story. So we did go up to the War Memorial a few months ago, and just to kind of, get a feel for all the stories that they have there. And we did see a few of the names on the Roll of Honour, which was quite moving.
The website is 108yearslater.com, and the diary that you've discovered, transcribed, we've still got quite a few months of diary entries left.
Yeah.
Leading up to the end of 1915. So, Karen, thank you again so much for your time. That's the podcast for today. You can find links to 108 Years Later on our Facebook and web page, and we're keen to hear your feedback by leaving a review on your podcast app. Your reviews helps new listeners find our podcast. You can help support this podcast via Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. The links are on our website and Facebook page, and your support helps us with the production of this podcast. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your service.